Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It is 3 o'clock in the East. Welcome. My name is Joe Aiello. I am the field coordinator for the Rail Passengers Association. Thank you for joining us this Wednesday afternoon. I know there's a lot of weather going on around the country. Just glad you're all staying here, staying cool, staying with us. We have a great presentation today on the Pacific Northwest and what it means to not only that region, but regions around the country. Just a reminder, if you can please remain muted, keep your cameras off so we can focus on the presenters the entire time. I am going to start off. Again, welcome. This is your introduction with me. We're going to start off with a legislative update from our Vice President of Policy, Sean Gail. Then we're going to work into our main presentation. Bob Krebs, the president of the Association of Oregon Rail and Transit Advocates, AORTA, followed by Charlie Hamilton, the co-executive director of All Aboard Washington. We will then be joined, kind of like a quick update of what's going on, like a little greater region of the Northwest. Barry Green, our council representative from Montana and the Northwest Division leader for the association. Then we'll have a Q&A section run by Madison Butler, our communications manager. And Jim Mathews, our president and CEO, will join us at the end to tell you what's coming up next in September. We are going to take the summer off a little bit for the webinars, but you know we're putting together an in-person thing coming up. So we'll give you a little bit of details from that. So without further ado, I introduce Sean Gail.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm going to try to be fairly quick because I know we have some very interesting region-specific presentations. However, there's a lot happening this week, and in fact, as we speak right now, on Capitol Hill that will very much, I believe, affect the trajectory of the implementation of a lot of service development plans that we're going to hear about today. So if I get the next slide, thank you. Just a reminder that we are looking at three-track infrastructure development program. We have the FY22 THUD budget. That's 12-month spending horizon. We have the surface transportation reauthorization. That's kind of a 5-year framework for spending. And the American Jobs Plan / the infrastructure bill. That's kind of what the president has used as the centerpiece of his administration in its first year. And what a lot of the talk is when you hear about the bipartisan infrastructure negotiations. Next slide. Today, we're going to be focusing on these two. You can see the terminology change. When I talk about the bipartisan infrastructure bill, that means essentially the big bill that is getting all the headlines and is above and beyond the surface transportation reauthorization, which again is on the floor as we speak. Next slide. So first up, bipartisan infrastructure bill. Next slide. We had a big breakthrough over the last week or so where there was a bipartisan framework released in the amount of $579 billion, not 547. 5-year infrastructure bill, and you can see here that there's some interesting top line numbers. There's not a lot of details yet. I think they still have to write the bill before we can get to that point. But we do see $66 billion for passenger and freight rail, as well as public transit with $49 billion. And so again, this is on top of the authorization baseline. And so we have to kind of consider this as above and beyond and frame it within that context. We're not all the way there yet. There's disagreement on whether to link this to a broader budget reconciliation. That gets complex pretty quickly, but essentially it's a lot of the less traditional infrastructure, schools, healthcare infrastructure, a lot of the climate change provisions would be included in that budget reconciliation, and there is still a lot of partisan kind of wrangling over whether those two things should be linked or whether one precludes the other. The other thing worth highlighting is there's a diverse set of pay-fors. I believe they have been widely panned as a little fuzzy, a little bit of budgetary tricks. The point for us is that these are not user fee-based, and therefore I think it really increases the argument that we should be investing more heavily in passenger rail and transit, because again, this is not being paid for by a gas tax. It's not being paid for by some sort of vehicle miles tax. And so that kind of disproportionate funding for, highways, bridges, roads, I think there's less of an obvious case. And you got to start thinking about, okay, well, how do we best use the available funds for what best achieves our goals of economic development, reaching out to rural communities that are underserved, and reducing harmful emissions and pollution. Next slide. Moving to the Surface Transportation Reauthorization. Next slide. HR 3684, which is passed out of the House, and it's House T&I Committee, and is otherwise known as the Invest in America Act, is currently on the floor right now. S 2016, otherwise known as the Surface Transportation Investment Act of 2021, recently passed the Senate Commerce. And what I'm going to do today is very quickly, again, because I'm already running out of time, contrast and compare some of the broader ambitions as well as some of the policies. So right here, you can see from a funding perspective, the Invest in America Act is just much, much more ambitious. It is not quite 3 times as much funding, but it's not far away from it either. So what you can look at the Northeast Corridor, the national network, and see the dramatic kind of increase in funding in the House vision, but also a few of the key grant programs like prime grants, bridge, tunnel, station grants are at $25 billion. The Senate version doesn't have the bridge and tunnel and station grants, and they chose to kind of stay with the federal state good repair model, which we think is a little less innovative, but also funded only at $7.5 billion across 5 years. So that's going to change a lot in terms which of those visions advances is going to affect to a significant degree what kind of projects we're going to see funded, not in relation to, are we just going to maybe purchase some new train equipment or and make repairs to the Northeast Corridor, or are we really going to start seeing advanced expansion, new routes, new services, restoration of services, and so on. Next slide, please. So here we can see, I just did a little bit of a cross table to show you, who has which bill, which version has what, and how they are structured. Focusing on a couple things. First is the prime grants. Right now it's $4.8 billion a year in the House version, plus $100 million every year for every year of the authorization. So 4.9 billion, 5 billion, et cetera. Versus the Senate version, which is the federal state partnership grants, that's $1.5 billion a year. It does have some improved eligibilities and project analyses by looking at not just ridership, but also and revenue, but also benefits. We worked really hard with Senator Markey's office to include that. But the fact that they just funded $1.5 billion a year across 5 years shows that they're not thinking about this as the growth program. Whereas almost every House program that they funded, they started out at a higher level than the Senate, and then they incrementally increased it every year. And that shows you that the House is viewing this as, okay, we are going to increase passenger rail's mode share within the National Transportation Network, whereas the Senate doesn't seem to have thought through. They just, and to be fair, they really made an effort to do a bipartisan passage. So you have some non-Amtrak states who are not invested into the passenger rail project that they have to take consideration of to get to those 60 votes threshold and avoid the filibuster. But it really is just, I think it's inadequate. And then the House version is much better on that front. I'm running out of time. I'm not going to go through some of these other things, but I did want to highlight a few things, such as Amtrak's findings, missions, or goals there at the bottom. Both, this is not a funding issue. These are both policy issues. But both the House and the Senate decided to respond to some of the Amtrak, I would say, saber rattling around discontinuing long distance and discontinuing service to rural America to focus on short distance urban corridors by including very specific guiding language to say long distance trains are important, and this is about providing a public benefit as much as it is about reducing federal subsidies. So I think that's important and worth flagging. Can we get the next slide? Again, another policy reform, Amtrak Board of Directors, both versions contain important reforms. Unfortunately, I would say, again, the House is slightly better on this one because they focus on not just geographic representation and making sure that you have long distance seats on the board, Northeast Corridor seats, state supported seats, but really saying they need to be elected officials in towns served by Amtrak or states served by Amtrak and an individual business line. The Senate decided you can have any individual within a state, and because Amtrak is pretty expansive network, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. And so we would have liked to see a little bit more focus on people with a proven track record of being rail advocates. The other thing is the House version has a seat for a labor representative for Amtrak employees, and as well as a passenger dedicated seat. Obviously, we're going to love that one. Two other really key areas where the House beats out the Senate version is they have provisions for preferential dispatching, which ensures on-time trains, as well as reform to how Amtrak accesses freight railroad railroad infrastructure when they're trying to add service and add service, but also build out a network. And so we've seen this be a holdup in a lot of different things, specifically, most recently, the Gulf Coast Restoration, where we've had CSX kind of dragging their feet. So the House version provides the Surface Transportation Board and a time-constrained process for Amtrak to really seek kind of mediation when there's a point of conflict. So without that, it's tough to see how we spend a lot of the billions and billions of dollars that we are looking to get in a responsible manner. Two other things, and I'm at 15 minutes now, so I really do have to wrap it up, make sure we get onto our program. Both the House and the Senate very strong on food and beverage reform. Both take the remaining vestiges of the MICA food and beverage restrictions. Representative John Mica, who looked to make sure profitability was the key driver in food and beverage decisions, rather than seeing it as a loss leader, trying to drive ridership and market your service. So those will both be addressed in the House and Senate version, as well as a food and beverage working group, of which, of course, rail passengers would probably position itself to try to be part of and provide guidance and public input into some of these service level decisions. Amtrak Office of Community Outreach, that is included in the House version, not the Senate version. I think it's important that Amtrak kind of have an official entity within it, an official office within it that is seeking public input and lets people kind of have a communication route. And can I get the next slide? Finally, and I think we're going to get into some of this, but the last thing I will say is a long distance restoration study that was involved in, that was including the Senate. It's not including the House. For various reasons, we chose not to pursue it in the House. We were one of the key driving organizations to that study. We were trying to get a working group, which would have had a little bit more of structured guidance on how these routes were supposed to be restored and how daily service was supposed to be implemented. They decided to go for softer language, just saying funding a kind of national study for restoration of routes and restoration of daily service. It's still a good outcome. I believe, I have a high degree of confidence it will get sucked up into the final version, included in the final version. And so it's very exciting for, the Pacific Northwest, because you do get North Coast Hiawatha would be one of those routes they would look at, as well as the Pioneer. Next slide. I've run out of time. There's a lot to go over. We'll include in the links we sent out to you our individual analysis of the bills. But like I said, it's currently moving on the floor right now. Next slide. We have tracked these following amendments. We actually, I have good reason to believe the Moulton Amendment to increase prime by $1 billion has been included in the kind of the manager's amendment, the en bloc, which means it has a very good chance of passing. So we're very excited about that. Some of these other ones we're opposing. I don't think they have a very good chance. We'll see about TWASI, about the North Atlantic Rail Interstate Compact. We've opposed that just because I'm not sure it makes sense to spend $105 billion building a second passenger dedicated main line in the Northeast, which already has one when the rest of the country is kind of struggling with one train a day or nothing. So hopefully that's not too controversial. Next slide. Senate's going to take it up in late July. September 30th is deadline. I've gone a little bit over time, but we will take questions at the end. And I'm just going to turn it over to Joe again, and we can move on to the region specific part of our presentation. Thank you.
Actually, Jim Mathews, if you want to come back on and give our introductions.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Listen, I'm just really excited to be able to highlight the work of our advocates and partners today. This is a great session. Really eager to see how this goes. First, I'd like to introduce Robert Krebs. He's the president of the Association of Oregon Rail and Transit Advocates, cleverly known as AORTA. Robert's an Oregon native with more than 50 years of experience in the transportation and tourism industry, including time as CEO of Grand National Tours, which is a transportation broker, managing tour operations in North America, Europe, and Asia. In 2004, he retired from a third career with the Oregon DOT as the Intercity Passenger Rail Coordinator. And he can point to involvement in the Amtrak Cascades train project, the renovation of the Willamette Valley railroad stations, improvements to the Oregon Intercity bus network. He also spent 12 years as a director of the Salem area Mass Transit District. So tremendous background and tremendous work being done by our friends at AORTA. And I'm glad to give Robert the opportunity to talk about it. So Bob, over to you.
I'll start again. Thank you, Jim, and it's a pleasure to be here and give you some background on what's going on here in the state of Oregon. I might give you talk about AORTA, which stands for the Association of Oregon Rail and Transit Advocates, and it is the assumed business name of the Oregon Association of Railway Passengers. And we are a 501c3 organization working to improve all forms of surface passenger transportation in Oregon, including intercity bus, urban transit, and intercity rail. Intercity bus in Oregon plays an important role in serving sparsely populated areas that are not on rail lines, and it also acts as a connector to our rail system. AORTA supports responsible transportation investments that provide equity, benefit the economy, and are environmentally friendly. Now, to achieve these goals, AORTA has been working to get a designated funding source for Oregon intercity passenger services. This resulted in a legislative concept being developed that did not move forward in the recent 2021 session. But we're still hopeful that we can move it forward in the future. Without a dedicated funding source for intercity services, there is no way to pay for the infrastructure improvements, rolling stock, additional frequencies, and the connecting bus network. So we're working with our colleagues in Washington who have been working to establish a legislative concept, and we're doing the same here in Oregon. And we have a lot of legislators interested in rail, but unfortunately they're intelligent people, but they do not understand how rail functions. And so we're hoping that by having a caucus, we can help educate them and gain support for the system. A recent preliminary online meeting with the senior legislature was very productive, and hopefully there will be a caucus in place soon that can address the state's future mobility needs. You see the map before you. You can see the state of Oregon is served by 3 Amtrak routes. We have the Empire Builder, which runs from Portland to Vancouver and then east to Spokane. The only stop in Oregon, which is also the terminal, is Portland. Then we have the Coast Starlight that runs from Seattle to Los Angeles, and that has 5 stops in Oregon. And then our main corridor, which is from Eugene, Oregon to Vancouver, Canada, is the Amtrak Cascades corridor. And this currently has 2 trains a day operating between Portland and Eugene, plus 4 throughway buses. The buses were put on many years ago as placeholders for additional trains. So our goal is that eventually these buses will be replaced by trains. Recent studies, or I shouldn't say recent, studies for several decades show that we could support up to 6 to 8 trains a day between Portland and Eugene going in each direction. The problem that we face in the Willamette Valley, which is the corridor from Eugene to Portland, is that most of the track is single, and the double track ends at the Portland city limits at the north. So you have a passing track about every 10 miles. This creates problems for people, for trains, because we have to hold to meet opposing traffic. And there have been plans in place for decades to put more double track in the valley, but unfortunately the funding has never come forth. By putting double track, we could eliminate or mitigate many of the road crossing hazards, as well as speed up both freight and passenger traffic. AORTA realizes that the freight railroads own the track, and in order to put more passenger trains on, we have to make infrastructure investments. This is one of the reasons we are supporting the funding package, and we hope that in the future that there will be both state and federal dollars to go into the Willamette Valley corridor so we can add double track and other improvements. As far as a long-range plan, we see extension of service of the Amtrak Cascade corridor possibly to Klamath Falls, which you can see on the red line, or to Medford, which is served by a short line railroad. The problem is that the short line railroad to Medford was built in the 1880s and is a very slow route because of curvatures and grades and out of direction travel. To build a railroad to Medford, it would probably require new construction to eliminate a lot of the problems, whereas the Klamath Falls option would only require some additional sidings. The cost to extend to Klamath Falls was probably a lot cheaper, but the potential of ridership is probably greater going to Medford and Grants Pass. The other advantage is that if the line was extended south to the near California, there would be options of connections into California and also possibly to Reno, Nevada. AORTA is also working to improve the bus service, intercity bus service, because these buses link areas that will probably never have train service to the rail corridors. It also gives rural Oregon something from investing in the rail system by getting the intercity bus service. When you look at the map of Oregon, the demographics are interesting. About 3/5 of the population lives in the corridor between Eugene and Portland. And if you look at where the city of Bend is located on the map, you will see that the eastern part of the state, 2/3 of the state's land area, only about 10% of the population lives there. And the Medford corridor from Eugene has about 1/10 of the state's population. If you were to give you an idea of the width of the state, if you look at the green line going from Bend to Burns to Ontario, from Bend to Burns, Bend is a population of about 55,000 people. Burns has a population of about 4,300 people, and that is 130 miles from Bend to Burns, and there is no community with 100 population between those 2 points. And then going from Burns to Vail, you have the same thing, 110 miles between 2 cities, both of which have a population of less than 5,000 people. That gives you an idea. And this is across the Great Oregon Desert, which is a good portion of the southeast part of Oregon. We also have a vision for commuter rail. There's opportunities using existing rail lines in the Medford area and also in the Portland metropolitan area to build commuter lines to take the burden off of some of the freeways and other road system. We recently, our TriMet is the major transit agency in the Portland area, and they have a brand new general manager. Sam Dessous Jr. Came to TriMet from being their chief operating officer from 2019, and he just is assuming the leadership there. There's more information about him on the TriMet website. I'd also like to talk about Eastern Oregon. That is another one of our visions of restoring the Pioneer. You see the green line that goes from Portland to Boise and then on to Salt Lake City. That was once the route of the Pioneer. And AORTA has been working with people in Idaho to extend that route and restore that service, and we're looking at ways that that could be done. But again, there is some infrastructure needs to add that train, so we're hoping that we're going to get a funding source to pay for those so we can add that new service. And I think I have covered everything on the corridor, and I thank you again for letting me represent AORTA in this webinar, and look forward to hearing from our other colleagues as they make their presentations. Thank you.
Okay, Bob, thank you. Next up is Charlie Hamilton, Charles Hamilton, Co-Executive Director of All Aboard Washington. He's the founder and co-owner of CHCS Consulting, which provides organizational development, marketing, and website services, including our website here at Rail Passengers. He holds a PhD in communication from the University of Maryland and a certificate in organizational development and training from Georgetown University. He's a former board member of the Capitol Hill Chamber of Commerce, that's Capitol Hill, Seattle. Also a former board member here at the Rail Passengers Association, many other community groups. He's also been an advisor, a partner, and a friend to me for many years, and I count on his advice, and I hope you will too. Charlie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jim. Well, Bob has given you an introduction to what's been happening in the Northwest, south of the Columbia River. Let me move forward to the next slide, which talks about what we're doing here in Washington. We have, as an organization, been promoting passenger and freight rail service in the Northwest for over 40 years. Nonprofit organization, like many of the other organizations around the country, that is comprised of citizens, businesses, and other groups. We're working very strongly now to be collaborating with organizations representing everything from environmental organizations to economic development organizations to equity organizations. Next slide. And in fact, we're looking at the benefits of intercity passenger rail in three ways. Many of you have heard this. Bob mentioned it a few minutes ago. Our friends at Amtrak is using something similar now. When you talk to people who are like, well, why should we be interested in trains? Then you can say, and I think we have really good reason to say, that there are benefits for the economy of local communities. There are environmental benefits. Here in Washington State, for example, there was a piece of research that was done last fall from the University of Washington that discovered that tires from rubber-tired vehicles are polluting in such a way that they're killing salmon. And in the salmon part of the world that we're in, that's big news. So when we say to people, hey, if you want to support a piece of transportation that is not killing the salmon, look at trains. Finally, we're also looking at equity. We're looking at how we can connect communities, big and small, that are underserved by other transportation options. As Bob talked about in Oregon, same is true in Washington. We have many communities that really are not connected at all well. If you want to go from one small community to another, even Greyhound is hardly operating anymore. And so, if you don't want to drive, really trains are the only way to go. Next slide. So we're getting ready to have a series of meetings across the state. Last year, of course, we were all doing things electronically. This year, we're hoping to do in person what we're calling a train track. We want to get feedback from local community leaders and discuss how those communities can benefit from passenger rail. Some of these places that are on this list, you'll recognize. Some of them are pretty small. But just like Bob suggested in Oregon, these folks are important and they're supportive. And so we're planning to go out in August and tell people what we think the future might look like, and then help them provide, give them the feedback that we need to take that word out to the legislators, both in Olympia, Washington, and in the other Washington, D.C. Next slide. One of the other things that we'll be doing this August will be, we will be participating in a regional rail forum, which is being put on by what's called PNWAR, the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, which is made up of elected and appointed officials from several American states and Canadian provinces. And we're excited about this because this is the first time that an organization like that has become interested enough in what we're doing to become part of the main track of their meeting. And so we will be talking to them in August, not only about the 3 E's, the economic and environmental and equity benefits. We've already asked our friends at Rail Passengers to give us an update on what's happening on the national level. As Sean said, what's happening now and what it might be looking like in August is up in the air yet, but we'll find out. And we'll be talking about some of the regional service restoration efforts that we've been doing. And we'll be talking about the legislative rail caucuses that we've already built in Washington State and that our friends in Oregon are in the process of creating as well. Let me go through some of these because I think they're things that we'll be talking about further. But let's go to the next slide, and then we'll come back. We've been talking, for example, about expanding service. You heard the discussion about, Sean mentioned the study that they want to do on a national level to find out where it might be possible to recreate services that existed previously. If you look at the history of Amtrak, for example, there are a lot of services that no longer exist and that we definitely want to bring back. And so this map with the people lived here on it is something that our friend Dan Bilka from the Rail Passengers Board came up with. I think it's really interesting that if you look, I'm sure you've all seen the Amtrak Connects Us map. There's this big hole in the Northwest that it doesn't have anything proposed at all. So we want to see if we can't make some changes with regard to that. And again, Bob talked about the existing services that we do have. We have the Cascade service. We have the Coast Starlight, which you probably just heard may be out of commission for a while because there has been a big the trestle in Weed, California is down and maybe down for some time. So, how do we get from the Northwest to California when the one link that we have is not in operation? It's too soon to tell how long that's going to take to fix or what we're going to do about it. But if anybody's planning to take the Coast Starlight anytime soon, check your reservation because it may or may not be operational. And so we really want to talk about improving service, not only in the Cascades corridor, which has only a couple of trains a day right now. The service between Seattle and Vancouver, BC is not running at all because the Canadian border is closed. We keep hoping that that will change. They make a decision about that every month. So the next date on that will be July the 21st. It'll be interesting for us to see when that border opens. we're hearing that when that border opens, there will be one train a day between Seattle and Vancouver, BC, coming back to two at some point. In between Seattle and Portland, we have the bypass, which, as many of you remember, was intended to go into operation in 2017, but because of the tragic derailment of Cascades 501, that did not happen. I know there's been a question about what is going to happen on the bypass. There is, we know that they're doing training right now, and that they are re-familiarizing people on the cruise to that new route. We're hoping that it will open sometime in the summer, but we haven't heard anything official yet as to when that will happen. And then, as I said a minute ago, we're really focusing now on east-west service and how we can expand service between Seattle and Spokane via Stampede Pass, which is in the middle route that's not shown on this map, but it serves places like Yakima, which is the largest city in Washington that has no passenger train service at all. And so that would fit nicely with the proposed work that our friends in Montana are doing to serve southern Montana. And we're hoping that something akin to what the old North Coast Hiawatha looked like, that would serve central Washington, southern Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota, would be something that will be in the study that will be done on the national level. So we're working very closely with our friends in all these other states to try and recreate a service that has not existed for decades. And so what we're doing is we're supporting what's being called the Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Working Group, that will be something that would be convened by the Federal Rail Administration, which means that they can start working without having to wait for each of the local state legislatures to approve these things. However, eventually it would be built into what are called the rail commissions. They're also called rail compacts. For those of you who are from the Southeast, you know that the Southern Rail Commission has been successful in recreating service in the Southeast, and they're working very hard with rail passengers and Amtrak to bring back the service in the southern corridor that was discontinued after Hurricane Katrina and has still not come back, although it sounds like that's coming soon. And we're very excited about what's happening in Minnesota. You probably heard the word today or yesterday that the Minnesota legislature has put together the funding to do a match to create a second train between the Twin Cities and Chicago. That's very exciting, because one of the things that is happening is that we need not only more routes, but we also need more frequencies. The calculations were that the Cascades corridor could serve and would be actually much more popular if there were something like 7 trains a day going between Vancouver, BC, Seattle, Portland, and Eugene. And the numbers indicate that you could support that. Our friends in California have done extremely well in the Capital Corridor and with the San Joaquins and the surfliners to have multiple trains a day. And the more trains you have, the more people ride them. So we're working on that. So again, it's about more locations, and it's also about more frequencies. One of the things that we have right now, of course, is that the Coast Starlight is, while it's not a bad schedule, it doesn't connect to Vancouver, BC. So you either have to take a bus or you have to go stay overnight in order to get there. And then in terms of getting across the state and to the Empire Builder, those are in the middle of the night. The only service that Spokane gets is 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So that's not very popular as a result. Next slide. So we do have, I know there have been some questions. We'll come back to them in a minute. And we look forward to hearing from everyone else. Thank you very much. Jim?
Thank you, Charlie. So our last up is Barry Green from the Rail Passengers Council in Montana, and also Northwest Division Leader for Rail Passengers. He's a retired locomotive engineer from the BNSF Railway after 40 years in Glendive, Montana. He's considered an unappointed ombudsman for the railroad terminal at Glendive. He's presented safety and rules classes to coworkers at Glendive. He held the positions of president, assistant secretary, treasurer, and legislative rep for the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, BLET, Division 180. Now, Barry's bio says that he has, quote, been active, close quote, with NARP rail passengers since the early 1980s, holding the positions of director at large, council rep, and Northwest Division team leader. So as the rail passengers president, I can assure you from personal knowledge that active does not come close to describing the one-man force that is Barry Green. I'm personally very grateful for his work, his leadership, and his friendship, and I'm really glad that he's with us today. Barry, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the introduction, and welcome everybody who was able to attend today. My slide is up and ready to go, basically broken down into bullet points. But the first part there, people, are Northwest Division Council representatives. As Jim mentioned, I'm the Northwest Division team leader, overseeing the, which encompasses the states of Montana, Idaho, Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. I also interact with congressional delegations in Idaho and North Dakota, along with our membership account. We don't have designated council reps for those two individual states. I'm able to conduct in every other month Northwest Division Council Rep conference calls with our council reps and invited guests. And I'd also like to acknowledge our current council reps for the Northwest Division. We have Bob Flint in Alaska, Hendrik DeKock and Patrick Carnahan, Washington State. I would like to thank Harvey Bowen for being a council rep from Washington. He is now a member of the RPA board, so we currently have a Washington State vacancy for a council rep. Mike Morrison and Donald Leap, council reps in Oregon, and Mark Meyer, who's an at-large council rep, also in Oregon. As most of you know, the Empire Builder returned to its daily operations beginning May 24th. They switched from the tri-weekly to daily. Ridership was low to begin with, but has picked up to a level where Amtrak now is short of equipment for this train to meet the demand. Besides that, we find ourselves being a little short on train crew members, station agents, and overall equipment. Amtrak's Empire Builder was at the beginning, I don't know about to date, but at the beginning was running with just one conductor between crew change points, such as between St. Cloud to Minot and Minot to Shelby. Amtrak staff stations from the Twin Cities to Whitefish are not back up to full capacity, and there's currently no staffing on weekends at either the Glacier Park Station or Williston, North Dakota, which both offer checked baggage. So it's like appearance that Amtrak is not being as proactive as they could be about hiring for these vacancies. As most of you know, the Empire Builder operates over the BNSF Railways tracks through the northern tier, and their operation of monster trains from time to time create problems for the builder. Besides longer freight trains, the BNSF is also operating what I'll refer to as monster grain trains to the West Coast. They're a 230 car loaded grain train with 3 locomotives on the point, 3 locomotives in the middle, 2 locomotives on the tail end, making up a 32,000 ton, 14,000 foot grain train. So when these trains have problems that tie up the whole railroad and subsequently can delay Amtrak if it happens during when Amtrak's supposed to pass through that area. My understanding that many of you have asked about the doings and the happenings with the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. They were established in November of 2020, and it's the first regional rail authority in Montana. It includes 13 member counties, along with 1 ex officio member from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And the group covers the entire 600-mile breadth of the state of Montana. They are a taxing jurisdiction, a subdivision of state government, and governed by a board appointed by member counties. This spring, they finalized their rules of procedure and are currently in the middle of strategic planning and development of their first budget for fiscal year 22. Initially, they will rely upon voluntary contributions from members, counties, municipalities, and other partners for the administration of the authority, but they retain the option to go before voters with a mill levy request in future years. Their main goal is to restore the former North Coast Hiawatha route, but are also interested in exploring passenger rail service between Denver and Billings, Salt Lake City and Butte, and points beyond. Finally, the Rail Authority is currently seeking funding to launch a socioeconomic study of restoring the North Coast Hiawatha route. They have also made outreach presentations to communities in Idaho and North Dakota to explain their mission and enlist their support. And they are also scheduling future meetings and presentations in both North Dakota and South Dakota. Their website, as you can see, is bigskyrail.org. And they do have a short video that was just recently released a couple of weeks ago, which I believe Joe will be able to queue up and play for the audience.
We are embracing passenger rail as a way to bring this state, this region, and this nation back together again.
If there was passenger train service that provided intercity transport, it would be a tremendous boost to not just local businesses, but also local tourism between those locations.
And that's what I have, and that's the news from the Northwest Division of the RPA Group. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Barry, and thank you everyone else for joining us today. This has been really awesome experience. So for anyone who wants to review this presentation and the supporting materials, you can visit our website at railpassengers.org/webinars. I would also encourage everyone, if you've enjoyed the webinar series, consider making a donation today to support this work as our advocacy returns to the field. For those who aren't members, you can join our membership, railpassengers.org/join. So we have some questions that were set in by members and supporters. So let's break these down by region. Joe, if I can have the first question, and if you wouldn't mind to bring our guests back on stage, I'm going to put this in gallery view so everyone can see our responders.
Thanks,
right.
Maddie.
Yeah, so let's start off with this first question here for Washington. We actually had a number of questions kind of similarly worded, but all asking the same general vibe. What, if any, timeline exists for implementing the Point Defiance bypass, and how firm is that timeline currently?
Well, I mentioned briefly in my presentation earlier that it is in progress. We have not heard anything official as to the exact dates, but we do know that they are doing tests and reauthorization for the crews. We're hoping that it will be sometime in the summer. I know that one of the the people who's on this call is from Washington State DOT, and he may have better numbers than we do, but that's all we have so far.
Okay, let's take the next question. Is service to places like Walla Walla a possibility? What do we see the future of that looking like right now?
Yes, absolutely. It's a possibility. And we are looking at a number of routes. The original east-west corridor did not include Walla Walla. However, it's one of the more obvious places that it could be extended to. As Bob Krebs mentioned, there are ways, for example, that one might do a bus that would connect to the train service, at least in the short term. But we will be going to Walla Walla as part of our train trek. So if anyone on the call is from that area and would like to participate, we'd love to have you.
Awesome. Let's get the next one. This one is for Oregon. What are the prospects for better alignments in and out of Portland City Center? Are proposals to make the Memorial Coliseum a high-speed rail station too pie in the sky, or do you think this is something that we could see?
I would have to say right now we're more concentrated on track improvements south of Portland. I know that one of the sharpest curves on the corridor between Los Angeles and Vancouver, Canada, is the curve going onto the steel bridge. In fact, when we operated the X2000 exhibition train, we had to go out to Troutdale and back because it couldn't negotiate that curve, and that is a 6 mile an hour track. So it would be nice if we could get through Portland faster. The problem is that Union Station is a very beautiful historic facility, and it's nice to use that facility. If you're looking at the track speed at the north end of the station, trains can go up to track speed almost immediately upon leaving the station. It's the crossing of the steel bridge that is the problem. But right now there is no plans. There have been some visionary discussion of rerouting the service and using Union Pacific's main line, so the trains did not have to cross the river. Right now, the trains cross the river twice. They cross the river on the steel bridge, and then a few miles north, they cross the river again on the Burlington Northern Railroad Bridge. And both of those are lift spans, so if there is river traffic, it could delay the trains. But at this moment, I would say there is a vision, but it's nothing being planned.
Okay, thank you for that, Bob. Our next question for Oregon. What is the status of Portland's Union Station remodel that has been in talks for years? Is there anything included on a further refresh of the Metropolitan Lounge? It was the first one on the West Coast.
I haven't heard any plans for improving the lounge. There have been numerous infrastructure improvements to the station to make it seismically safe, and there was a new roof put on the station and other improvements. But as far as the Metropolitan Lounge, I have not heard of any plans. The lounge is a fairly nice facility. I've used it many times myself, and it is one of the first ones, but I feel it is a nice facility the way it is, and it would be nice to have a bigger one, but that's what we have right now.
That makes sense. This is a regional question. So what, if any, discussions are going on between those state advocates for more Seattle-Tacoma area to Spokane service and Southern Tier Montana service? Could one combined train for both help meet the desires of both the constituents, and what that would look like, daytime service, where, when? And I think we've touched on this a little bit, but if you all would like to elaborate, I'll open the floor for this one.
Sure, Maddie. We have been talking to our friends in Montana about that. We did some back of the envelope calculations to decide that the cross-state service between Seattle and Spokane would fit nicely with the service that's being proposed in southern Montana. And there are ways that you could do that in terms of logistics and in terms of times that do in fact make sense.
Okay, Barry, do you have any thoughts to add to this as well?
I agree with what Charlie said. I know, Maddie, that where we sit in that big oval circle there, that people do live here. The problem is we don't have the population to put together what Amtrak is pushing as per their corridor services.
Yeah.
So we really don't want multiple corridor lines across the country when we should have a long distance route. I know there was talk of working with the group in Minnesota and Wisconsin on the Baby Builder, but of course that is pretty much being set up as a corridor service and will probably stay that way, and would not readily turn into a long distance service, which could make a lot of sense from the Twin Cities all the way out to the West Coast.
Okay. Let's get our next question, Joe. We have another regional one here. Bozeman is growing like crazy, as you know, Chicago, New York, those larger city markets are shrinking. Long ago, there was a Chicago to the West Coast passenger rail service through Bozeman. What is the likelihood of restarting that? And again, this is just continuing a discussion on that gap we were talking about, but with more of a focus on Bozeman specifically. Barry?
I guess it's whatever, the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority group can push forward. Whatever we gain out of the various legislative documents that end up getting passed in Congress, whenever they do get passed, to see what we can do with that. The person that submitted the question is right. Bozeman pretty much merges into Belgrade, for people that are familiar with the state.
Yeah.
And it all looks like one community now. And I've even seen that since I moved out here from upstate New York. So it really is a transformation, and it has grown like crazy. So the best that we can do is keep at it. And of course, that's why the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority was started, just to get something going.
Absolutely. Joe, next question. Okay, so this is a general question. I might take this to Jim or Sean first. So does SEC 2214 of the Surface Transportation Investment Act of 2021, as mentioned in our hotline, this requires US DOT to evaluate restoring discontinued long distance routes like the Pioneer, North Coast Hiawatha. What are the chances of this or a version of this passing into law? And the statement they left us with was, we need expansion of the long distance network as well as all of the corridors. Jim, would you like to take this first?
I would love to see Sean jump on this, because as we talked about during this session, a lot of this is happening right now, literally during this conversation. Bill's on the floor right now in the House. So Sean has been keeping one eye on that. Sean, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, happy to. So, I mean, the first thing to say is we worked very closely with Senator Manchin's office on um, the the daily restoration for the Cardinal and Sunset, and the Big Sky Rail Authority, I think, was kind of saw that effort and realized it was a really good opportunity for them for the restoration of the Hiawatha, which they've been working for. So, I mean, the provision is anything discontinued after 1971. So yes, they fall within the parameters that the legislation outlines, along with a number of other routes. I think the Floridian is another one, as well as the Desert Wind. But in terms of its prospects for final passage, the House actually reached out to us about a study and language on that study, and we had been again pushing for more of a working group, which would have had outlined concrete steps to take to restore the services to daily. And so the Senate decided to go another way, which is fund some studies and identify capital projects needed, equipment, labor costs, all those kinds of things. So the House has already indicated support for this concept to us. So I would be shocked if it didn't end up in the final law. And I believe right now there's about 15 million across 2 years to fund these studies. So, whatever that buys you, I think it's certainly better than where we are now, and it will be a good pipeline of projects to start developing for restoring these long distance services, which we haven't seen in a very long time. So that would be incredibly impressive.
Jim, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think I'm good. I think try to move it along.
Awesome. Sounds good. So that was our last of the questions that had been submitted. We do have questions coming in the chat. Just for the sake of everyone's time and our team's monitoring the floor as it is, we are going to respond to all of those in our follow-up. So as we always do, railpassengers.com/webinars. You can also check the Friday hotline for updates on these materials. We have one last matter to cover today. So I want to pass it back over to Jim, who has a fun little preview, a little teaser for what's coming up next.
So we are over time, so this will be an even shorter little preview than I had in mind previously. Next slide. For those of you who were signed up for our spring meeting, we because of COVID, we kicked that into the fall, and the registration is now open for what we are calling Rail Nation DC 2021. You can register there. The room block is open for the Embassy Suites in Alexandria, directly across from the Alexandria King Street Station. We are planning a really robust program. As most of you know, we try to get really good speakers and good presentations for these meetings, as well as include congressional visits to press for our issues. We think that this is a terrific moment for this, given what's happening right now, literally as we speak on the House floor. We think that with the timing of recess and other issues, going to DC in September to really make that final push could be exactly the right timing. So I really encourage everyone to consider joining us in the Embassy Suites in Alexandria for our DC meeting. And we are also planning what we're going to call an additional program on Tuesday, which will run simultaneously with our congressional visits. For those of you who may not be able to make those congressional visits or may not have interest in doing that, we're going to make sure that we have a parallel program. So please keep checking the website. Just because something's not there today doesn't mean it won't be there tomorrow. We will continuously update the website as we add speakers and program elements. But please go check out Rail Nation DC 2021. And we will be taking the registrations for the conference. And there's also a link to allow you to book a room at the Embassy Suites in our room block for the special rate. So please do that. And we really look forward to seeing you in DC in September. I guess we're up to Joe.
Jim, thank you. Thank you everybody for attending. Thank you to all our speakers, to Bob, to Charlie, to Barry, Sean, and my fellow co-workers, Madison, Sean, and Jim. Thank you to all of you, to our members, to our fellow advocates, to everyone watching. This has been our 14th webinar and event we've done in a row since all this happened. We've had hundreds of people per webinar viewing live, thousands extra watching on YouTube after the fact, and we can't do this without you. Hoping to see some of you in person in September. It'll be great, but have a great summer. We're always around, railpassengers.org, our websites, and follow us on all our social media. We're going to keep you guys up to date with the hotline and everything as much as we can. So take care. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you down the road.